Welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi. On this episode, my guest is Dr. David Tkach. David is an academic librarian in Calgary, Alberta, and holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Ottawa. He also was the bassist in the band Giant Sons from Winnipeg. As any longtime listener of this podcast knows, Giant Sons was an instrumental trio that also featured David Guillas, the Beeve, on guitar, and Robbie Richardson on drums. Beeve is known to all of you as Propagandhi's second guitarist on supporting cast in Failed States, and you also might remember Robbie appeared on this podcast on our Oka Everywhere episode. David Tkach and I have been corresponding for a long time about him coming on the show as a guest, and we decided on a song, but as we got to talking, we talked for 2.5 hours, and the Giant Sons portion of the conversation led seamlessly into a conversation about the Giant Sons song Repairing the Damaged Beard, which went on to be adapted into the Propagandhi song Tertium Non Datur. Due to the profound level of depth and detail in the conversation, I decided to split it in half and bring to you this Tertium Non Datur companion episode. In this episode, Tkach and I discuss his musical path, partnering with Robbie and Beeve, releasing music on G7 Welcoming Committee Records, and his thoughts on Tertium Non Datur. Part 2 of our conversation will appear in a different episode very soon, so without further delay, please enjoy Tertium Non Datur Part 2 with Dr. David Tkach. David Tkach, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm delighted that you're here, David. Yes. I'm wondering if you can spend a moment and introduce yourself to the audience so they know who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is David Tkach. I'm a librarian at Bow Valley College in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And my connection to Propagandhi, aside from being an extremely long-term fan at this point, is that I played bass with the Beeve and Robbie in Giant Sons, and played guitar with Beeve and Robbie in March December Swing before that.
Wonderful.
I'm born and raised in Winnipeg.
Wonderful. What I'm curious about your musical journey. So you go way back with Beeve and Robbie, who have both been on this podcast. Beeve's been on several times at this point. Tell me a little bit about your musical trajectory.
Sure. And I realize that probably a lot of the sort of moments Robbie and Beeve talked about already. So I don't know if I have another perspective to share, but I might mention them as well. So I guess with punk rock in general, and it actually started with Propagandhi. I guess a little bit before that in junior high. I remember I skateboarded a lot when I was younger, from 13 to about the age of 22, 23. And around the age of 13, I remember skateboard had an SNFU t-shirt, and it was the Open Your Mouth and Say, and it had this sort of scary zombie on it. And I was like, what is that? That's terrifying. And so I started talking to the skateboarders, and they gave me unfortunately my first punk rock record was a Dayglow Abortions record, and won't go into that. I think they're kind of nightmare, but anyway, so I listened to that for a bit. I got really into hip hop in high school, and still kind of listened to sort of grunge and stuff like that. High school was sort of the early 90s for me, and of course in the early 90s sort of punk rock became huge after Nirvana and then Green Day and Offspring, etc. So I listened to those bands, and then sort of immediately from those bands, went on into more Epitaph, Fat Record stuff. I can remember actually one of the first records that I bought was How to Clean Everything on CD, along with Pennywise Unknown Road on tape from in Winnipeg. Brought those home. So yeah, I kept listening to that. I started a band with my brother when I was 17. So this is 1994. We were called Oversight. Um, it was myself, 17, playing guitar and singing, my brother on bass, and at 14, and a drummer also at age 14. And we played a few shows and things like that, and kind of had like connections things. We actually played a show with Ryan Nash's extremely old Winnipeg band. They were called Kentucky Fried Children, if I'm not mistaken. It was a good time back then. But yeah, we played a show with them at Aussie's in Winnipeg, which is in Osborne Village now. I think that building has been destroyed, so our past has been erased. But it's funny because we played that show and I was swearing so much that the guy who put on the show was like, "Hey, you got to stop swearing so much. The family's here." Anyway, so it was a good time. So I played in that band. We were sort of this combination of like, I mean, we're just playing whatever we were listening to. I had skateboarder friends who had more sort of indie rock tastes. So I got really into Archers of Loaf and Superchunk and things like that. And then into Fugazi as well. And in this band with my brother, we actually did a Superchunk cover of Punch Me Harder from No Pocky for Kitty.
I feel like I love that record, Foolish. It's one of my favorite records of all time.
Masterpiece. Yeah. I just adore that. I think like it was a strange time that I felt like I was in this band. This was my first band that I was playing in. We could just do whatever. My brother immediately got into a lot more sort of crusty punk stuff. So we did a Superchunk cover. Then we started writing songs that sounded like Capitalist Casualties and a whole bunch of bands whose names I don't remember. I have all the 7 inches upstairs. I haven't listened to them for a while. But so my brother and I kind of like went different directions. We still wanted to play in bands. I got really into, I guess, like 90s hardcore and emo. So Fugazi, but then also stuff, I don't know if you know Shotmaker from Ottawa. So Shotmaker, they were on, Ebullition Records.
Yeah, I've heard that record label.
So they were on that. So this is the kind of like screamy, angular Portraits of Past, I think was another Ebullition band. I got super into that. There were a few people that did sort of tabling of like distros in Winnipeg. One guy in particular, Mike Alexander, who was the singer of Swallowing Shit and Head Hits Concrete, he brought in just tons of records from all over the place, and I would get these records from there. And yeah, it was really a time of sort of like learning all this stuff. But so that was the type of music that I really wanted to play after the band I was in with my brother. So I started a band called Element, which had Ben Sigurdsson from Elliot. It was another Winnipeg band from.
Yeah, I've been in touch with him.
Nice. Yeah, he was in. I'm not sure if it was 60 Stories or Anthem Red, but yeah, he was in one of those bands. And Kelly, who was in 60 Stories, she was in Element with me. So that was her, I think, first band. She was playing bass, I was playing guitar and screaming, and Ben was playing drums. And we played 2 shows. Ben moved on to another band, so we didn't play any more shows after that. One of the shows was in, I don't know if the name Brendan Enger has ever been mentioned to you, but
not off the top of my head.
So he's definitely connected to Winnipeg punk rock. He was in a band called Bucko, and he had a record store called FTW. It was called Flip the Weckard. But of course, he had stickers all over that just said, sometimes you just got to say FTW. I got tons of records from him, and he also suggested a bunch of stuff. But so I was in this band, Element, played 2 shows. I still had a few songs. At the same time, Robbie was playing drums, I think, in quite a few different projects, and also guitar in some other projects, was like doing a lot of different bands. And one of those bands was, I think, like a kind of ska punk or oi band or something with my brother, Michael Tkach, who still plays in Winnipeg. His band is called Zombie Assault. They are really awesome death metal band.
Nice.
Anyway. So yeah, so he's been in bands the entire time too. I feel like it's a really awesome thing that both my brother and I have basically stuck around in bands into our 40s and just keep going with it. Anyway, so we were in. Robbie was in this band with my brother, And my brother taught, I remember him sitting actually in the kitchen at dinner time or something like that. And my brother was like, yeah, I know this guy named Robbie. You guys both like the exact same music. You should hang out. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so I remember meeting him. And I think we both skateboarded still a little bit. This is probably now like I'm like 21 or something like that. So this is like 90, I'm going to say 96, 97. And we went skateboarding. We both, skateboarded a bit, and we're starting to get old and starting to feel like we were hurting ourselves. And he was like, "Yeah, I play in bands. We should try something." And I was like, "Cool." And so he had this band where he was singing and playing guitar. Another friend of his that I think he mentioned the name, but I didn't know him very well. And then I tried out on drums, and I'm not a drummer really at all. I can keep a beat, but I generally am just not. I have zero skill on that instrument. So we tried that a couple of times, and that like I think at that point, he didn't. I don't think it was that he didn't want to keep playing in that band, but it was like, let's try something else. And so I had mentioned that I was in this band Element. I had this one song that I had written for Element that we never played called Distant Galaxies, that I wanted to try again. And so talking to Robbie, I was like, yeah, I'm really into, we sort of shared a mutual love of Propagandhi, but also like, oh, we listened to Drive Like Jehu and some more like San Diego Angular hardcore kind of stuff. And then I started getting into things like Sunny Day Real Estate, sort of backwards, and then Mineral and Braid and things like that a little bit after. But so I said, okay, let's try jamming this song. And Robbie was like, oh, I have this friend named Beeve, named David as well. Everyone calls him Beeve though. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. And he's like, so Beeve can play bass. And I was like, no, we should, I want to have this band play with two guitars because I really like the sort of, having dual guitar interplay. So we'll both play guitar and then we'll find a bass player. And so I remember actually in the first time jamming with Robbie and Beeve in Rob's mom's basement in St. James. And I think it was like at 5 p.m. or something like that. And Beeve came in, and I could see like he was wearing pajamas under his pants, and it was because he had like just rolled out of bed or something like that, like at 3 p.m. I think at that point he was working the night shift at a restaurant or something like that. But yeah, it was. I was just like, who is this guy? And he came in, had the SG. I was like, oh, give some SGs. It's fantastic. I had sort of an Epiphone black SG that I kind of customized a little bit, and ended up selling to someone, and then weirdly it burned in a house fire.
Oh my God!
A couple years after that, so my first guitar no longer exists on the planet, which is a weird thing. Anyway, so we jammed. We played that song. We jammed a whole bunch, just Robbie and Beeve and I started writing songs, and I think like the songs that sort of came out of that era, like we would sort of bring riffs, Beeve would bring riffs, and we would just kind of go with them. I immediately realized that, like, I think I'm an okay guitar player, but Beeve is, even at that point before he joined Propagandhi, it's like, okay, he's got much more skill, and just his like, I think Robbie's an incredible drummer as well, and Beeve's an incredible guitarist, and I feel like both of them. Well, we'll talk about Giant Sons in a little bit.
Yeah,
but yeah, it just felt like such a pleasure to be playing with them, and very easy to play with them so
nice.
much. And so we finally found a bass player named Kevin, and we played it, I think, a couple of shows as Kid Icarus, and then played probably for like 2 or 3 years as March December Swing. And we didn't play any like huge shows. We played like an Exclaim Brave New Waves thing that so I was a huge fan of Brave New Waves, which was a CBC kind of alternative music show that started at midnight on CBC radio every night, hosted by Patty Schmidt. And Patty Schmidt kind of came to Winnipeg to be part of this, and we were all just so excited about this because Brave New Waves was extremely important for, so many, listening to so many different types of music. I think for like everyone that was really into music in the like mid to late 90s, early 2000s, we all listened to Brave New Waves and just, it was sort of a source, a reliable source for new sounds. So anyway, so we played with Mark Summer Swing for a while. I think Robbie went on vacation for like quite some time. And that sort of like put the band on pause. And then at the end of it, I think we just kind of decided, okay, I think this band has run its course. But Robbie, Meave, and I wanted to keep playing together. And this is something I know that I think they both mentioned, definitely Robbie mentioned in his podcast that initially, so yeah, we definitely like, we as a band all got super into bands and really intensely into those bands. So at that particular moment, this is like probably 2000, we all got super into Springsteen, and we're just like, Springsteen. And I know Robbie mentioned Chamberlain as well.
Yes.
We got super into that band. We got super into, just sort of like roots rock. Constantines was another one, sort of like a rougher voiced. And yeah, it was just like.
Love the Constantines. Love them.
They're one of my favorite bands.
I got to see them open. I got to see them open for the Weaker Thans in St. Louis, and it was unbelievable. Constantines came out, and it was like the Shine a Light era.
Yeah.
And then the Weaker Thans immediately after that blew my mind.
I think I saw that tour in Montreal. Was that like the mid 2000s?
It was like 2003. Like what a perfect tour. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that's sort of, I've had this discussion about music with people many times over the years where it's like, I listen to a lot of different things, and I'm like, I'll mention that I listen to something like Carly Rae Jepsen, whom I adore. And, people be like, oh, why do you listen to that pop stuff? And I'm like, and I feel like my main criterion for whether I like something or not is whether it feels honest to me when I'm listening to it, that it's people sort of, no matter what the genre or no matter what instrumentation they're using, that there's a sort of human passion flowing out of that music to the listener.
Yeah.
And I feel like with Constantines and Weaker Thans, they don't really sound anything alike other than use guitars and drums and bass.
Yeah.
They were such a great combination of bands to be touring together. And like, it just made perfect sense that, if you're into one, you're probably going to be into the other, vice versa. So anyway. But yeah, so we wanted to do this roots rock band. We were thinking about trying to find a singer, and didn't really know anyone that was like a vocalist. I don't even know if we even tried out. I think maybe they mentioned in one of the podcasts that we tried a singer once, but I honestly don't remember. But we listened. We were sort of like, how do we do this band? And at least for me, there was this musician, Chris Brokaw, who's from Boston, I think.
Yeah, I know him.
Okay, so do you know the album Red Cities?
I do, yeah. I know that album.
Okay. So that record for me, that is ground zero for Giant Sons, because it's an instrumental record. Chris Brokaw played everything on it, guitar, bass, drums, but it's an instrumental record that does kind of roots rock, kind of it basically, it wasn't Don Caballero, it wasn't Weights and Measures, it wasn't like a math rock band. It was something that they were writing, or he was writing songs that were kind of slightly, there's sort of like an alt country tinge, but like just rock. And I think Robbie and Beat, this happened to them as sort of a revelation. It definitely happened to me as a revelation. It was like, oh, he can do it. Why don't we try that? And we were listening a lot to bands like in I was listening a lot to things like Braid and Promise Ring, but then also Karate. And I think Karate was like a huge influence, certainly on my bass playing, and I think kind of on what we were doing, what Beav was doing guitar wise as well. And so we started writing these songs. Oh, another band that was like massive for us at that time was Wooden Stars, another Canadian band from Ottawa. So like, and they're like extremely complicated dual guitar interplay stuff. So all of that kind of like, you know, we had been listening to all this stuff for a while. We've been playing in bands for a while. Let's start jamming. So we wrote a couple of songs, recorded them. Beav had gone to do sort of like recording engineer classes. So he used some of that, and he had like a digital 8-track that we recorded some things on, put them up on MySpace, which was amazing. Sadly, those recordings they vanished when there was like a big MySpace crash, whenever that was. I tried to find them again. They're gone forever. But we ended up recording, I think the band Giant Sun started in like, I'm going to say like either late 2001 or early 2002. We recorded, I think, 2 records in 2002 or the beginning of 2003. We recorded two records in one sort of year. There was like a longer album that we did at Private Ear in Winnipeg, and then a shorter kind of EP that we did at a friend of ours in another band. It was his grandmother's house, and we went with the guy named Craig Boychuk, who's another recording person in Winnipeg. I feel like he probably still does music. He was another sort of musical, just genius, really, really brilliant recording engineer. And we recorded both of those records with him. A friend of ours named Curtis Walker, who has been doing electronic music under the name Blunders Public. He did sort of like an album remix.
I've heard that name, Blunders Public.
Yeah.
It's popped up on our social media a couple times.
So I think he goes under that name definitely on Twitter. And maybe like he's been putting out really interesting electronic music for a really long time. But yeah, so he did a remix of sort of the entire album that became a song on the first Giant Sons record. And then, we went on a single tour. I know Robbie talked about this one. Basically, it was a 2-week-long vacation into Southern Ontario in which we played, I think, maybe 5 shows out of 14 days. It was definitely not any kind of we didn't recoup any money that we spent on it, that's for sure. But it was a really, really fun time. We went with the Down and Outs that Ryan Nash played in. We played basement shows, a couple shows in Toronto, a show to absolutely no one in Thunder Bay, Ontario on the way back. I have that show on VHS. I hope to eventually digitize it. There's an amazing moment where I think on stage I say like, so yeah, we'll be playing with Propagandhi in like 2 weeks or something like that. And you can just hear this one person in the back go, yeah. So happy. So totally empty room except for the folks that were touring with us. But yeah, we came back to Winnipeg, and then there were 2 more shows. One was opening for Propagandhi, and then one last show at the Collective that I'm actually hopefully going to be putting up on Bandcamp soon, because I found the CD at the bottom of a box of CDs. And incredibly, there is a song on that, the one and only Encore that Giant Sons played, which is a song that Robbie and Beav wrote when they were 14, I think. It could have been Populist Manifesto days. It could have been Jabba the Butt days. I'm not really sure. But the name of the song was Butt Cut. And it's an instrumental song, of course. It basically sounds like a, early Propagandhi song. It's about a minute long, very, very fast. I was happy to play it because I would always play it at band practice and never played it live. And we just decided like, okay, this band is finished. Before we start playing, you can hear Beav say like, you guys are going to hate this one. And then we played it, and then that's the end of the band. So so that band ended. I moved to Montreal. I lived in Montreal, Quebec for almost 13 years. I moved for grad school in philosophy, did a master's degree at Concordia. Um, then did a PhD in philosophy at the University of Ottawa. I lived in Ottawa for a year and a half, moved back to Montreal, basically lived in Montreal from 2003 until about 2016. I finished my PhD in philosophy. Probably about with a year to go, I decided that I wasn't going to try to be an academic. I wanted to try to get into academia, but through a different path than becoming a prof, because I mean, this is sort of a common knowledge in academic circles. It's like very, very difficult to find a permanent full-time job as a professor.
Yeah, I can't believe that Robbie has been so successful.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah, I think that like that kind of thing. This is a sort of an interesting thing about Winnipeg, is that so many people I know, they either went into, who were in punk rock at the time that I was there, so like probably like 95 to 2003. So many people who didn't keep playing in bands, and even ones that did keep playing in bands, they went into some kind of form of education. So it was either university. A lot of people became profs. There's a few other people that I know that went into like political science and things like that, and now are professors in the US. Or they became teachers, like Beeve. Yeah, so I feel like there's a strong connection between Winnipeg punk rock of that moment and education, and being educated by those bands and of other bands touring through Winnipeg. And then, obviously with connections to Mondragon and sort of more, I guess, like left-wing theoretical reading that some bands communicate, but obviously, there aren't really, I guess there are a few sort of like dedicated Marxist bands, but none of their names are coming to mind for me in terms of like, this is a really good moment where, in this chapter of Capital is sung so well in this chorus or something. I can't really think of that actually happening. But yeah, a lot of people became educators of some kind in whatever form that took. So,
I'm wondering about a couple other things too. So how did your relationship with I want to know about the relationship with G7 and Giant Sons and what it was like to work with them, because I don't really know anything about that. And I don't know if you all were a defunct band by the time G7 became involved. And we'll get into, I want to talk a little bit about repairing the damaged beard as well, but I want to talk about your relationship with G7 first.
So from my perspective, there's actually not that much to talk about. So I moved away in 2003. Robbie moved away, I think maybe 2005, something like that. Not too long after, because they had Rough Music, whom I actually saw on tour in Montreal, which was wonderful. They stayed in my very, very small apartment on the floor while they were touring through. But so Beeb was still there. And then I started sort of like hearing things like, Beeve is jamming with Chris, and they're going to be doing some like new instrumental band or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. This is sort of like prior to Beeve joining Giant Sun, or joining Giant Sun, joining Propagandhi. So I just got sort of an email, probably from Beeve, was like, oh, the G7 guys want to re-release our records. And I was like, what?
Sweet.
Because I think as Robbie mentioned this, like, I would say that, like, especially after G7 re-released things, when we were a band, Giant Sons, we didn't have like, there's a few people that were like, oh yeah, this band's really, really good. But, it was like maybe 20 people who would come regularly to shows. So it wasn't a really like, we didn't cause major ripples in Winnipeg music during our brief existence or anything like that. So he said, do you want to do that? And I said, yes. And then in 2006, we did a reunion show at the Albert. So Robbie was in can say Hamilton. He lived in Hamilton and Toronto around that time. So he came back to Winnipeg. I was in Montreal. I came back. We jammed a bit and then played this one show. And it went really well because I even to this day, out of all the bands that I've played in, somehow like every Giant Sun song is like muscle memory. And I play bass now and I've played bass in bands since moving away from Winnipeg, but I don't really ever play with fingers at all. And in Giant Suns, I only played with fingers. So like even the chords, like as I was, strumming them out, I would always get like blood spattering all over my bass because I was like chewing through my the quick of my nails. But yeah, so in that 3-year gap, I hadn't forgotten any of the songs. We played that show. I remember actually playing that show and someone coming up on stage, because like of course didn't have a singer, someone coming up on stage and it was the Albert, so chances are she was fairly inebriated, as everyone was. It's just a hellhole. But yeah, she came up on stage and was just like into the microphone said, oh, like, why aren't you guys dancing? This band is amazing. You should be dancing. I remember that so clearly. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. What a lovely moment to have. And there was a few more, like it wasn't, I don't think it was sold out. There was like probably like 100 people there or something like that, because the G7 re-release had come out at that point. And it was just amazing to be on that label, because, like that label, they were very, very eclectic in their releases. I think probably like my favorite release on there was Reticuli, the hardcore band from New York. I just like that style of that kind of His Hero Was Gone / tragedy, kind of apocalyptic, emotional, crusty punk or crusty hardcore. Yeah. I just eat that up like candy. I think it's like just magical, and they were one of the best of those kinds of bands. But yeah, it was just like, I don't think Giant Suns, like we certainly, being an instrumental band, and our, the songs were kind of just like written as kind of, either inside jokes or something that sounded like a very nice phrase or something like that. There's a reference to Lord of the Rings in one of the song titles, a chapter from the Fellowship of the Ring, and there's another song title that's a reference to when Robbie and another friend of mine, who I still know quite well in Calgary, named Matt Simpson, who went to high school with Robbie and Beef. Robbie and Matt and I went to see Botch in Minneapolis in, I think, 2000. Maybe it was their last tour or something like that. But we stayed in a hotel room. We saw this just absolutely awful movie called Hitman's Run, which stars Eric Roberts. Anyway, we were just like, this movie is just atrocious. And so one of the songs, there's a dream sequence in this movie where Eric Roberts just like, sees some like carpet cleaning people coming into his house. He's like an assassin in this movie, whatever it is, a hitman. And he just straight up murders these people, just brutally. And we were watching this in the hotel room. We're like, what the hell is going on here? And then it just like, he kind of snaps out of it, and he was like daydreaming. So anyway, that song, the Giant Sun song, soundtrack for the dream sequence from Hitman's Run, that's the origin of that. So yeah, to go back to the G7 thing, we didn't present ourselves as an explicitly political band. I think we all were and are very, committed political people. But so the band was not that, and like it never really presented ourselves that. I think we played benefit shows in Winnipeg for certain causes, but we had never from the stage, like, all right, the song's about the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike and how we want to see that again, and workers unite. We never presented ourselves as an explicitly political band. So it was, for me, it was a surprise actually that G7 wanted to do this. And I think that this is a weird thing about this band that, I mean, here it is now 20 years later. I'm still talking about this band. And obviously it's through the connection to Propagandhi, but yeah, like G7 has a lot to do with that. And obviously Beeve then joining Propagandhi, and I guess Chris listening to and enjoying Giant Sons, because I know he came to a few shows towards the end of our existence in Winnipeg. And I guess, yeah, it's just wonderful that happened.
So now what I want to know is about, so a couple of years down the road, Beeve's been in Propagandhi for a while, and all of a sudden this song comes out, track 3 on the Almighty Supporting Cast LP, and the song is called Tertium Non Datur, which is originally composed by Giant Sons and performed under the name Repairing the Damaged Beard. Yes. And I am wondering about your story of this particular song, and any thoughts about the old version, comparing it to the Propagandhi version, and then the process of what that was like, of like learning that this was going to like be on the next Propagandhi record, which winds up being like a freaking masterpiece of music. Tell me about this from your perspective.
Yeah, so I think I view that the fact that it became a Propagandhi song as like a, you know, it's a musical badge of honor to me. And, you know, I've certainly told that story to people like, hey, the song that I was involved in became a Propagandhi song. But it's almost like the reaction that person has that I tell the story to, I know how much they like Propagandhi gauged on their reaction. If someone is just totally flabbergasted, I'm like, okay, yeah, I think we're going to get along. But if someone is not so into it, it's like, okay, we'll see. So, but yeah, I think so. It's an interesting phenomenon when I think back to writing like that song, or really almost any Giant Sun song. As Robbie mentioned on the podcast earlier, the band was never a serious band. We would, every Friday night, we would go to jam for like an hour and a half, write out some stuff, play some things, and then go to this place called Cousins, initially for coffee and then eventually for beers. It was a nice time. But I don't really remember writing songs with them. I remember kind of snippets in the jam space, but never like, okay, this is the day we wrote this riff. The way it generally worked was that Beeve had guitar parts that he would bring in, and then we would just play them over and over and over and like try things out. And I think like what I always thought my job, quote unquote, in that band to do was to provide kind of the bass, the melody that would kind of guide the song in a particular direction around Beeve's guitar parts. And I think that, you know, we wrote everything in standard tuning, but, you know, Beeve obviously like changed keys quite a bit. And as we kept going, like it was just so easy to write interesting things to go along with his guitar parts. With Tertium Non Datur, we recorded that as like one of the last 2 songs before I moved away. And I mean, we kind of had like the 2-3 go kind of joke part of like, you know, like a fist in the air, kind of straight edge hardcore band moment at the beginning. But you know, I really like that song. The story about the name Repairing the Damaged Beard was that Beeve and I actually just recently shaved my beard off to have sort of like better mask sealing going out in public during the pandemic. But so we've had beards back and forth for a long time. Robbie has as well. That one was we had this one beard, you know, all big TNG fans, Star Trek The Next Generation. So we had this one beard called the Riker that was like very sort of like going like this, looked like Commander William Riker's beard. And then often when we were shaving, you know, we'd go a little bit too high and it was just like, oh, shit. So that was the idea. It's like you kind of have to like repair the damaged beard by letting it grow back to the shape that you want it to look like. Anyway, this is the, when you explain a joke and all of the hilarity just evaporates out of the joke. So apologies for if I explain the magician's trick there a little bit too much. But anyway, so that song was on there. I heard Beeve join the band. I was just like, oh my God, this is wonderful. So wonderful. And that was something around that time, which I guess is like 2000, let's say 2007, because I think I'm not sure if he was playing in Propagandhi. He might have started jamming, and maybe it wasn't officially announced when we did the Giant Sons reunion show. But I was in Montreal, and I started hearing through emails that Beef had joined Propagandhi. And I was just like, this is fantastic, because, I was thinking back. So I don't know if either Rob or Beeve mentioned this, but so Bee's family had a cabin at Clear Lake in Wasagaming, which is a town in Riding Mountain National Park in Manitoba. And by this cabin was sort of a communal cook shack, which was just like a place where you'd have a fire and you'd be cooking stuff. And so those guys, long before, I think when they were probably like 14 or 15, they'd all like kind of taken metal pokers and like written band names all over the inside of the cook shack. One of them was Propagandhi written there. And it was just like, I thought to myself, as soon as I heard that news from Beeve about him joining, it was just like, this is such a wonderful, like, for one of the less ridiculous term, cosmic moment that, someone whom I adored as a guitar player was now in this band that I adored. And like, just, knowing how huge they were and continue to be, how they've been able to tour, all over the world and things like that. And just that happening for someone that I played with for such a long time. And I, feel like, at least up until the time where I left Giant Sons, that we sort of like grew as musicians together in the same trajectory. So just to have that happen was so wonderful. And then I heard that, like, I think B sent an email like, we're going to be doing a cover of Repairing the Damaged Beard, but we're going to rework it. Is that cool with you? And I was just like, yeah. And just unbelievable to me that something that I had contributed to musically was now appearing on a Propagandhi record. And then I heard it, and it was so much better than I even could have imagined. It was like, I think Beeve played it in drop D. It was the only thing he tuned down was his low E string to play that song. And I think, I'm not sure what the tuning was for Propagandhi song, but it was definitely like wholly shifted down to maybe C sharp or C or something like that. And just hearing it, played by, like I said, I think I'm reasonably good bass player and, okay guitarist and things like that. But to hear it played by people who are just phenomenal, incredible musicians who have dedicated their life to music as their, for want of a better term, career, life's vocation, whatever you want to say, to hear that song being played by them, it just blew me away. And then I want to talk a little bit about the lyrics as well, because I think that, Propagandhi obviously has been starting with Haile Selassie up your ass, and, very, very intensely anti-religion. I was looking at the supporting cast lyric sheet, and, there's mentions of Chris Hedges and Christopher Hitchens and things like that. And that's sort of like, at that time, the sort of new atheism that, I don't really want to go down discussing that too much, because I have my thoughts on that. But thinking of the lyrics of that song. So through my education, I never really specialized in philosophy of religion, but the philosophers that I studied were definitely connected to religion very, very intensely. Mostly Judaism. I should mention that I wrote my doctoral thesis on Martin Heidegger and Leo Strauss, both of whom are absolutely abhorrent politically, but I felt very important to study. Anyway, philosophy of religion has always been sort of a thing in the background for me, and especially the contrast between reason and revelation as sources of knowledge for human beings. And this song, there is no third thing. There's only the black and white of salvation or shame with fuck all in between. those lyrics are like, I think for me, some of the most important that Propagandhi ever wrote, not only because they have the political elements and like what follows from, I guess, a politics that stems from, in a lot of cases, organized religion, a politics that has been nightmarish for the world and the people and other beings in it. But just, hearing those lyrics sung so intensely over the music that I contribute to, even to this day, it's like a transcendent experience to hear it. Yeah, it's just been wonderful.
I'm so delighted. I almost feel like whenever I introduce your segment of this episode, that I'm going to have to say that this interview is almost like a Tertium Non Datur Part 2 episode as well. Because the Tertium Non Datur episode, it's only like an hour long, which is short for us. And I feel like just now you sort of offered the missing piece to what we didn't get at when we did that, because we did that way back on episode 10 when we were still kind of figuring out the format of the show. But that is like Tertium Non Datur Part 2 right there for me.
Cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, I would it be appropriate for me to talk just a little bit more about the lyrics?
Of course it
awesome.
is.
Okay, so I think that this idea of there is no third thing, I mean, it's, putting it in Latin, I think it's meant to refer specifically to sort of a Catholic Christian tradition. I don't want to speak out of turn for what Chris intended with that, but I think that the lyrics really, I mean, they're very anti-religious, and kind of implying that religion is a security blanket for people who are afraid of death. I think that the afraid of death part, I think, is like maybe me adding to it. So I should say at the outset that I'm agnostic. Absolutely, I think atheism is a fundamentally untenable position philosophically. We won't go down that road, but that's my position. I think Chris maybe would disagree with that, but anyway, regardless, I think that the lyrics for me. The reason why I think they're so important is because they really bring out the tension between reason and revelation, both as sources of knowledge and then as sources of an ethics that follows from that knowledge. And I think that, it's intended to be a song that indicates that ethics is or can be shades of gray, first of all, that there isn't black and white all the time. I think, and I'm sure Chris thinks this as well, that there are absolutely black and white ethical answers to ethical questions, but not the black and white that a religious person that is sort of the theme of that song would see it as. And I think there's obviously like very different people, different religions, different religiousnesses that people adopt, even in any particular church, even among like the people in one pew in the church. I'm sure that everyone has a different view of what the person at the front is saying. But I feel like that song for me, I don't think there's any conclusion that I can draw from that, except that it's meant to be critical of people who adopt a religion-based ethics and then think that that's the end, that like you have become an ethical person because of that, because the religion tells you conveniently, makes things simple for you, makes things black and white for you, and you don't really have to think for yourself to see what actually is the ethical question that is happening and what a potential answer is for that ethical question.
Excellent. Well, and the fact that you had a part in composing the original version of what becomes these profound ideas. I can't even really articulate how I feel about that right now, and how special that must be for you that it became something so powerful. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's like backing up from sort of my views of the song. and it's sort of the details of the lyrics and things like that. And sort of how I feel about their interpretation of the music. Like just to have that happen, like I said, like it's just such a special thing for me as, you know, as a massive Propagandhi fan, long before I met them, long before I saw them live in Winnipeg, and then long before like I got to know them, long before someone I played with joined the band, contributed immensely, I think, to the band, and brought one of the songs that I wrote into the band. Like that's just such a, yeah, it's sort of a transcendent thing to think about.
Tell me a little bit about what that LP, Supporting Cast, as like a whole finished product. Tell me about your thoughts on that record in general before we dive into Potemkin City Limits itself.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned way back at the beginning when we were starting talking, that I sort of backed away from Propagandhi a bit in the early 2000s. So I loved How to Clean Everything as like a skater and a skateboard punk guy who really enjoyed skate punk. I loved Less Talk More Rock because it seemed like it was finally kind of not maturing, because there's some kind of like moments of silliness, and there are obviously moments of silliness throughout Propagandhi, which is such a wonderful thing about them. But it was a response to How to Clean Everything. Today's Empires came out, and it was like, oh, they're now a thrash band. This just rules. Like, I mean, I, again, love the Weaker Thans. I'm very happy that John Kay left Propagandhi and Todd came in, because I'm a huge I Spy fan. The fact that he was able to, you know, move into that band and really bring it back to their, you know, progressive thrash roots. That they're basically now they've, you know, all the records they put out over the last 2 or 3, they are a progressive thrash band. They finally fulfilled the promise of their like bass player wanted sign that they put up into the music a long time ago. But yeah, I think like Today's Empires, though, I love that. And then I moved away from Winnipeg, and I sort of kind of actually drifted away from Propagandhi. Potemkin City Limits came out, and I bought it almost out of a sense of duty more than anything. Like I wasn't really listening to that kind of music. When I moved to Montreal, I started playing guitar and bass with a lot of electronic people, including Blunder's Public that I mentioned before, because he lived in Montreal at that time.
Yeah.
So I got really into like the Montreal, like mid 2000s electronic scene. And then of course, like at that moment, Arcade Fire and Wolf Parade suddenly became huge. So I was like listening to their earlier records, and was really focused on like Montreal music, and kind of like drifted away from Winnipeg a bit. The Potemkin City Limits came out, and I bought it, and I was like, this is interesting. This is good, but I wasn't really listening to that kind of music at that particular point. And then I think, and I feel like I need to be corrected on this if I'm wrong. For some reason in my head, I have this idea that there's some interview that Chris did about that record where it said he was listening to Razor's Sacrifice Voivod and Giant Sons before writing that album. And I was like, and if I'm wrong with this, I apologize. I viewed this one as like a badge of honor, and maybe a false badge of honor. So at least Tertium Non Datur is real. We know that. But yeah, when I listened to that record, I was like, oh yeah, I can totally hear like, you know, like thinking about, and this is like my knowledge of the record. What is the song that Todd's lyrics, Is This Life, at the beginning? Like that really complicated.
Oh yeah, it Cut Into the Earth.
Cut Into the Earth. Yes. Okay. So the one that Beef talked about on the podcast,
yeah.
Right? So like hearing that, it's like that. Like obviously Beav was not in the band at that point. That sounds to me like a Giant Sons riff that Beav would have come up with. Not that complexity necessarily, because like at the time of Giant Sons, I don't think we really had that ability in us to do that kind of thing. But it really sounded like, oh, okay, yeah, I can hear, you know, I hear like the metal parts from Today's Empires, and then I hear, yeah, there's like little bits of this like, you know, they're doing these kind of longer instrumental passages. That's new. And that like that may be the Giant Sons influence, if that's a thing. Anyway, so, and then Beef joined, and I was like, okay, I'm right back in. I'm so happy for Beef to be in this band. I think I'm trying to remember if Beef toured with them before supporting cast that I saw. I think maybe.
Yeah. I saw them in 2007 with Beef for sure.
Okay. So I think I saw them in Montreal, and I think they played. They definitely played some supporting cast songs. I don't think I really recognized any of them, but I was like, seeing them with two guitars was just unbelievable. Then when supporting cast came out, and I could immediately hear Beeves, like not only his guitar but his songwriting style that I had kind of known through Giant Sons, but it was in such a like refined and precise form. Like, I know probably Robbie, Beav, and I would all say this, that there's mistakes all over the Giant Sons records. There were no mistakes on supporting cast. And that's not to say it was sterile. I think that it was thinking of like the Night Letters to supporting cast to Tertium Non Datur 1, 2, 3. That to me is like one of the most powerful openings of any album I've ever heard.
I 100% agree.
And it's incredible. I really actually feel like supporting cast feels like an album opener, and because of like the kind of longer instrumental-ish part of the beginning, which again I was like, oh, that sounds like a Beef thing. I don't know if he wrote that bit or not, but like it goes from that 1, 2, 3 just devastated me. And then as we'll talk about Potemkin City Limits after that, just I feel like that album, every single song just hits me so hard. And it was probably like, I'm sure there's a connection to, it was the first one that Beef appeared on, so I was like, so excited, listening so intently, like, and I think they maybe say in the liner notes, like whether it's left or right. Anyway, I'm sure there's more than 2 guitar tracks in a lot of those songs. But just being able to hear him contributing to this band that meant so much to all of us growing up, it's phenomenal. And I mean, I love Failed States and I love Victory Lap, but I truly feel like supporting cast it's my favorite of all of their albums for sure.
It's mine too. Yeah, it is. I can't. I don't know if anything. I don't know if any music ever will top that record for me. I don't know.
Yeah. It's tough to think like what that would be like. And I mean, like I said, like my history with Propagandhi, like there was a lull for a few years and then kind of like went back in. And I don't listen to Propagandhi every day. And I'm sure that the biggest Propagandhi fan in the world maybe doesn't do that either. But yeah, I feel like there's no band that really has had as much of an impact on me as I'd like to think as a musician, but certainly as a human being. But then that album has had the largest impact of all of them on me for sure.
Well, you mentioned how they have this impact on people who listen and who listen closely and who think about the ideas that are contained within the songs. And we've heard it time and time again on this podcast, how this band has challenged people to change the ways that they live their own lives. And I think that a song like Potemkin City Limits is one of those songs which is so deeply powerful when the listener processes what is happening, that it shines some pretty stark reality lights where we are forced to look at our behaviors and look at ourselves in the mirror quite a lot. And you've mentioned in private correspondence with me just how deeply the song Potemkin City Limits has impacted your life. And so I want to know about your love of this song. We can go through this however you like, because this is a very lyrically heavy and very wordy song. There are many, many words, many lines. So we can